Hello, welcome. I'm so pleased to be here today. I'm Cheryl Perkins, President and founder of Innovation Edge, and I've been in transformation my whole career. And the two other people that will be part of this session, Mike and Jay, who I'll introduce shortly, have also been involved with transformation. And we're really excited because today we're going to talk about something that we think is so critical, especially during this time when the only thing that is constant is change. And you're going to hear from these seasoned leaders how important it is to be resilient, not only as a leader, but to build a resilient organization. I'm going to use a few slides here to set the context, but let me just highlight who's here today. Myself, as I mentioned, Mike Eknoian, Global Vice President of R&D from Church & Dwight, and Jay Gouliard, SVP Packaging, Design and Data R&D from Mondelez. Now, all of us have had different careers in different companies, so you're going to hear different perspectives from all of us, but I think you'll hear some common themes. And so I want to set the context before I have Mike and Jay dive deeper into their backgrounds, a little bit about resiliency. Now, those of you might not know David Goggins, but he is like this ultra marathon runner, and he's also been trained and is a retired Navy SEAL. Now, when you think about the word resiliency, there's lots of definitions out there. And I like this one the best because it really hit home with me on the bounce forward piece. Resilience isn't just about bouncing back. It's about bouncing forward. And I think both Jay, Mike, and I will have lots of discussions about bouncing back versus bouncing forward. And often you have to use the setbacks as stepping stones to really propel you towards your goal. So I want you to really listen how many times you hear these leaders today who are resilient leaders talk about how they bounce forward and how they pivot, sometimes quarterly, sometimes monthly, sometimes weekly, sometimes hourly. Hopefully that's not a lot, Jay and Mike, but yes, we do that periodically. But you'll hear how they pivot, and I think it'll be really exciting to hear them. The other thing that we're not going to have a lot of time to talk about, but there's very few resilient organizations out there today, ones that can really absorb all that's coming out them and really manage business disruption well. But there's some key characteristics in these resilient organizations that are out there. They're prepared, they're creative, they're adaptive, responsive, collaborative, trustworthy, and definitely non-hierarchical, very matrixed and able to work across all areas of the organization and externally with partners. So that just kind of lays the context of what we're going to talk about today. And I'd like now to start with you, Mike, have you give a little bit of background about your background and experience and your definition of a resilient leader.
Yep. So thanks, Cheryl, and thanks for having me on this panel. I really appreciate it. So as Cheryl mentioned, Mike Eknoian. So Mike, I'm at Church & Dwight today. My current responsibilities are for new product development, as well as for, from an R&D standpoint, focusing on resilient supply chain, which is a new role that we'll get into in a little bit of, that was formed actually post-COVID to ensure supply chain resiliency for the company, which, as everyone knows here, is really critical. Prior to Church & Dwight, so I've been at Church & Dwight for about 6 years now. Prior to Church & Dwight, I was at J&J Consumer for about 15 years. And my technical background is I have a PhD in organic chemistry. And so my definition of resiliency, I think Cheryl hit home on it a lot. It's really, a term that we're coining within our walls that we kind of stole from Gartner, is really around anti-fragility. So ensuring that the organization, no matter what's thrown at it, can adapt and move forward. So it's not about going back. It's really being able to, adapt to what the current headwinds are and then keep moving it forward. So that's when we think about resiliency, whether it's supply chain, whether it's personnel, or whether it's, innovation. It's really ensuring that we can adapt with what gets thrown at us and move forward from there.
Excellent. Thank you, Mike. Jay, same thing for you. Background and your definition.
Thanks, Cheryl. It's great to be here today. My name is Jay Gouliard, and I have over 30 years of experience in the consumer goods world, leading packaging, innovation, and sustainability for some of the world's most loved brands. I've been fortunate enough to support brands such as Oreo, Cadbury, Milka, Coca-Cola, Budweiser, Dove, Knorr, Magnum, and Cheerios, and a host of other global and local brands. And I've touched almost every product family that you can find in a typical supermarket. And my career experiences, which all of were global, include my current role as the Senior Vice President of R&D, accountable for packaging innovation, design and sustainability, digital R&D and specs for Mondelez International, one of the largest snacks companies in the world. Prior to that, I was with Avery Dennison as the Group Vice President of Innovation. I was Unilever's Global Vice President of Packaging Development and Design. Spent some time at General Mills in Minneapolis, Minnesota as a Vice President of Packaging Development and Innovation. And then before that, the Director of Global Packaging and Development, Design and Innovation at the Coca-Cola companies. And I started my career at Anheuser-Busch as working in integrated product and process development, as well as R&D, supporting all their different subsidiaries. So I have a broad base of experience across the consumer goods world, and most of my life I've spent in the innovation space. And for all of you that know what innovation is like, it requires a lot of resilience because you get rejected time and time again, just like an actor who would get rejected time and time again going to auditions. It's the same for the innovation. And my definition of what a resilient leader is, I think to me, it's a leader who is truly energized by the challenges that they are faced with, who never gets discouraged by disappointment and setbacks, who leads the organization through adversity and change with authenticity, care, and respect, who stays aligned and acts according to their own values and beliefs, who is confident enough in themselves to take the right stand and advocate for that stand, even though it might not be politically correct in the organization they're working in, and who makes the tough decision to move on after exhausting all attempts to influence others and acts consistent with the beliefs and values of the enterprise. And I think there's one maybe quote here I'd like to share with you. Actually, it's some lyrics from a song that was written in 1936 and performed by Fred Astaire. And it says, "Nothing is impossible, I have found, for when my chin is on the ground, I pick myself up, I dust myself up, and I start all over again." And even though it's almost 100 years old, I think it's still extremely relevant in today's world of leadership.
Excellent. Well, with that robust definition, Jay, I'm going to start with you with our next question. I'd like you to really share with the group here when something unexpected comes up, and you and I've worked together for many years in many different companies. How do you go about facing that? As a resilient leader, based on the characteristics you just talked about, tell me about that journey and how do you get started?
Yeah, Cheryl, I think the first thing, well, I know the first thing I do is not to act, but to stop and think, to truly understand what the challenge or the opportunity or the issue is that I need to address. Take the time to really think deeply about it, because if I don't spend the time on the front end, I can find myself and the team running towards directions which might not be appropriate to solve the problem. And after I've really formalized the problem and written down the problem statement very clearly so that I can share it with the rest of the team, I engage the rest of the organization that I need to collaborate with in order to help solve these problems. None of us can solve these issues or these problems on our own. We need strong leaders around us and strong teams around us that can help us work through these different issues on a day-to-day basis. I wrote down here that it's difficult to be a lone wolf in today's world and solve the problems that we need to solve. We need to act as a pack, and as a pack, we can work together and achieve more than we can ever achieve by ourselves. So that's sort of how I approach it, Cheryl, when I'm faced with a challenge or a transformation or an issue that I need to deal with. It's never alone. It's with the right people in the organization, reaching out to them, even if they don't participate in helping to solve the problem, just getting their insights and their experience and applying that to the problem is extremely valuable.
Yeah, we'll come back to that whole pack collaboration piece shortly. But Mike, when you and I were talking about resiliency too, we talked about, listening to understand and really get in and making sure that we have 2 ears for a reason and one mouth, that we are listening. So do you want to talk a little bit about how that's helped you when something's come your way and you had to pivot?
Yeah. You know, as you know, when you're running an organization, as things are getting thrown at you every day, it's really truly understanding and listening to see what are we trying to solve for, right? And then not only what are you trying to solve for, but also what does success look like for that solve. So, for example, you know, during COVID, every company was looking at supply chain resiliency. It was all around dual or multi-sourcing of raw materials. Um, and initially, when we started addressing the problem, it was very reactionary. Okay, material X has a problem. Let's just go get another source and get it in for an emergency. Um, but you know, really, what does success look like? Success looks like that you have a strategy on your core materials that you can pivot, and some of them require dual sourcing. Sometimes it's working with a supplier to build that resiliency in, right? So it's not only just one size fits all for it. And you know, to build resiliency in the organization and to lead from that respect, it's truly asking the right questions and listening to the stakeholders to understand what does success look like at the end, and then building your strategy that way, as opposed to just reacting to it. If you just react to it, you're just solving a specific problem. You're not actually figuring out how do you make the organization stronger in the future.
Now, Mike, I do want to build off that a little, because often, especially during times of COVID, speed was so important too. So you've got this balancing act going on. You're trying to listen, you're trying to build out a strategy, leverage that strategy, but then you have the counter of that is go quick, right? So how do you get the right rhythm, and how do you create the right speed and take the right calculated risks?
Yeah, it's always, this is always the healthy tension, right? Speed with strategic intent. And the reason why there's a tension is because a lot of times, you know, strategic intent takes a long time to get alignment for. And that goes to your point of, you know, kind of working in a matrixed environment, and also not having a non-hierarchical and empowering teams to do it. Realistically, if you get to the core of the problem fast, your strategy will accelerate everything else you want to do. So going to that same example I was saying on multi-sourcing, you know, the initial approach they had was, let's go find another supplier to do it, as opposed to let's talk to our current one and see how do we build resiliency into that. And that has enabled us to accelerate that from having, roughly less than 10% of our materials dual sourced to, by the end of this year, we should be well over 65%. Having some type of resiliency, not only just dual sourced around it. So it's really having that core team of the right stakeholders and the right decision makers in the room. And we've all heard the scenario. A core team should be maybe 3 or 4 people. It's not 150 people. And really working it out relatively quickly and having speed and agility built into that. And that accelerates it, as opposed to just doing things just to be for the sake of doing them fast, which may not be the right approach for it.
Right. Another thing, as we benchmark and look at resilient organizations and resilient leaders, you find that those resilient leaders create their ecosystem, right? They have a network of thought leaders or others that they rely on. And Jay brought up the pack, right? Who's the pack that you're there? Can you talk a little bit, leveraging this example that you've been talking, supply chain resiliency, and how you, again, were able to get people to rally around that and collaborate, especially with almost 2 different strategies in play here that you had to try to pivot and find which one was going to work?
Yeah. So, like I said, it's, to use the term pack, which I actually like, and I'm probably going to steal, right? It's, this at the highest levels of the company. So our CEO, our CFO, right? This resiliency was deemed as something critical. Our CFO always said, if you asked them on 4th of July, 7 to 10 years ago, what his top 5 priorities were, supply chain resiliency would not be that. If you ask them now, it would be number 1 or number 2. So you have now leadership saying this is a critical aspect. And to your point, it was spot on. There were competing objectives between operations, R&D, quality, and as well as the overall business to focus on this. And what we did is we made a pact. right? It was functional heads of procurement, R&D, and quality sitting down, defining what success is, and that literally took 20 minutes, right? And once you have that, then it's executing that plan, and it's also about prioritization. In these areas, prioritization is key, as we all know. And it went from every day there was a new priority A. We were getting to this is AAA, this is A++++, which then, as we all know, nothing gets done. So now we have a priority A list. It was a finite number, and then it's a one in, one out kind of scenario. Yes, emergencies happen and we can pivot, but by the most part, it's really not, and it's really having that that small pack that makes the calls and is empowered to drive it forward.
Excellent. Jay, continuing on this theme of collaboration, I'd really like to share kind of how you build advocacy, right? In many places you're starting with you and a page of paper trying to determine out what to do, but then how do you build that team around you, and how do you create pull within the organization? Because that's a sign of resiliency too, that you can't do it alone. You have to have those people. And often, to Mike's point, different functions have competing objectives. So how do you align those objectives and get people to rally and actually have a whole group of people outside yourself that are actually doing what you need them to do the change?
Yeah, Cheryl, that's probably one of the most challenging things that we need to do when we're faced with these types of challenges. And I would say, one of the most under-leveraged tools that most of us don't rely on too heavily is storytelling. And I think it's so essential that we develop a great story behind what we want to do and the agenda that we want to affect. I think in that storytelling, you have to make sure that you understand how what you're doing impacts each of those key stakeholders personally. Not just the company. I mean, I can talk about how what we're doing impacts the overall enterprise at this level and that level. But when I'm trying to engage each individual or different departments, you really have to reach down and find out and touch their hearts and find out what really moves them individually and personally, and show them that what we're trying to do is not a threat to what they're doing, but it's something that can really add value to what they're doing in their part of the business. Because for most of us, as Mike had said, it's hard to get alignment across the organization from end to end on objectives and metrics. We all have competing metrics, even though we try to get them aligned. So making sure that you have a story that touches everybody personally, that is aligned with the purpose and the values and the beliefs of not only the company, but of that individual, can really help you affect that agenda very quickly and make those changes and get through those transformations and be resilient and deliver what you need to deliver.
Now, Jay, one thing that I want to probe, because I think you do a really good job at it, is when you do identify a resistor, often the tendency is to try to put that resistor on the side and say, okay, I'll deal with that later. But the best you can do is actually bring that resistor in and help you blow it out and become part and take ownership in what it is. So talk a little bit about how you manage resistors in that process.
Cheryl, you're absolutely right. I certainly want a pack or a tribe of people around me that have the like minds, I guess I would say, to achieve what we want to achieve. But you also always, in every instance, you run into somebody that says, no, this can't be done. I don't want to do it. It's not the right thing. And it's really important, especially if those are influential people. I used to call them sneezers, because if they're good sneezers, they can spread the virus, and pardon the virus analogy, but they can spread that virus very quickly to other parts of the organization, and you can find your agenda sidelined very quickly. So I do what I just mentioned before. So I try to find the 1 or 2 points that are really impactful to that one resistor or that individual. Explain to them how what we want to do can really help benefit their part of the business and their agenda. And it's a constant negotiation and a constant discussion. As I mentioned, storytelling to make sure that they understand the story and why we're doing it, and talk to them about how it's aligned with the purpose and values of the company. Then most of the time you can be successful. Sometimes you just have to give up, because you can spend all of your energy and all your time trying to bring the resistor on board, and some are just incorrigible, I guess I would call them. And then you just have to know when to say I quit, and just forget about trying to bring that person on board unless they're absolutely critical to the success.
Yeah, Jay, I was thinking back because years ago I was involved with Jim Collins when they were doing the book Good to Great, and there's a section in there called the Hedgehog Principle, and it was all about getting at the heart, right? It's like, how do you motivate and really get somebody that, again, because you've listened, as Mike said, but you're empathetic and you find out what really makes them tick, and that's how you bring them on board. And that's a really important skill for a resilient leader, to be able to be empathetic and build that trust and try to bring those people on board. So I think that's excellent. I'd like to talk now about something we're all faced with, is activity-driven culture. You know, especially now with all the constant change, everything we're faced with is really focused on getting things out the door, checking the box, being clear that this is priority, and speed, speed, speed. We talked a little bit about that. But when you try to transform strategy, process, people, and you're trying to really deliver, as you two are, innovation in big organizations, what have you done to really manage the activity-driven culture and hopefully bounce forward from the learnings in order to improve the results? So Mike, why don't you start?
Yeah. So, activity-driven is somewhat of a, it's a double-edged sword, right? Individuals a lot of times will find work to fill in the time. And we all know, if you're running around from meeting to meeting 8 to 10 hours a day, you have no time to think. And having no time to think means that you're doing tasks, you're not really driving anything. And so, we've been on this journey for a while of really, how do we, move from a culture that's very much was like more of a service culture, right? And what I mean by service culture, like, there's always functional groups that are service and some are drivers. R&D at Church and Dwight for many years ago was much more of a service culture, where you wait for your phone ring, someone calls you, you pick up the phone, and they tell you what to do. And what we started doing when a lot of us came on board, and Carlos Linares, who's our CTO, kind of started the ball rolling with it, is everyone was saying they wanted more time for innovation, but they had no time because they were going to meetings, right? That's because they were doing activity-based. We heard that, and then we started creatively freeing up individuals' time by getting rid of busy work. Now, more junior people, it's very hard for them to get rid of busy work because they can't push back and they can't say no. And so what we did as a leadership team is, to stop the swirl and getting people to jump on things, is we were shielding a lot of the organization from a lot of the swirl until we knew, yes, we're going to do something. Then when we're going to do it, we operationalized the right team and did it. That freed up individuals' times to then then push them to do more innovation and focus on innovation. So we have a program called Future Works within Church and Dwight, where anyone within R&D, no matter what level you are, no matter what group you are, if you have an idea, we will fund it, much like a Shark Tank thing, but we really never say no. Over the last several years, almost all of the big bets we've had in the company that have gone to market have come from that. So we just adjusted people's work, right? It's not like they're sitting around doing nothing, but we've gotten rid of the churn by shielding them from a lot of the noise that we hear as leaders on specific issues, and streamlining that communication down to avoid them from just dropping everything and focusing on something that might change in another couple of days.
Right. Excellent. Now, that's kind of the good news, Mike, about that story that you're telling, is you got alignment among that leadership team, and it was kind of top down. Let's figure out how to focus on the added value things and eliminate the activities. But, Jay, that's not always the case. And sometimes it's hard because you might have a board or a C-suite that's very focused on the activities and getting it out the door. So how do you manage up when you've got that activity-driven culture and still achieve what you're trying to achieve with that right balance with speed?
Yeah, I'm fully aligned with Mike on the fact that time is the most precious asset that we have in our organizations today. And in most of our organizations, as he mentioned, are very activity based. And you know what I try to do, Cheryl, is to make sure that my senior leaders understand the value of giving time to everyone to think. As Mike mentioned, we don't think often enough. We just act, and we run to the shiny penny in the corner of the room. And when someone drops another one, we run to that one. And so what I do, Cheryl, is first of all, I advocate for freeing up time by asking team members to create lists of things that they shouldn't be doing and things that they ought to be taking off their plate. And you don't know how difficult that is for people because they don't want to give up all of these things. It's what made them who they are, and it's what made them successful up until today. But it's not going to make them successful into tomorrow. And that's the sort of the mindset and the context that I'm trying to change within the organization. And I do that a couple of ways. One is by making sure that in the annual contract that we have with the team members, that we give them time to think, and we encourage them to go outside the company, to interact with consumers, to visit museums, to do things that they need to do in order to be inspired to bring new innovation into our organization. I also try to model that myself. I try to do things and show them that I don't need to be sitting at my desk in front of my computer 12 hours a day or with these earbuds in talking to people every minute of every day. I take time out and sometimes take people from my team with me to explore different elements in nature, different elements in the world, talking to different consumers to truly understand how we can do things differently. So I give people permission. I try to model that behavior. I influence up to make sure that the senior leaders understand how important it is for us to do these types of things. Work with the teams to make sure that we take everything off the plate that we don't need to have on the plate in order to free up that time, and then reward them for their actions at the end of the year. And as I said, make sure that you have goals and objectives that are aligned with what you want to achieve, and then things will flow. It's not easy. You can't just give permission. Sometimes you have to grab them by the hand, take them out the door and say, this is what we're going to do today, because it's important for you guys to get outside of the walls of the building, out from behind the computer, get the earbuds out and start thinking about how we can look at the world and innovate based on what we see.
Yeah, that's excellent. I want to switch gears a little bit and go back to something I said at the very beginning, that there's very few organizations I see today that are truly resilient, and there's very few resilient leaders. So you as leaders, as you're recruiting and you're looking to bring new members on your team, either from other functions within the company or from other companies, what types of skill sets are you looking for? I mean, in the past, everyone would have their, criteria around background and experience and all that. But I'm seeing a shift, especially in these resilient orgs, towards the softer skills and the things we've already talked about, listening, empathy, building trust, taking calculated risks. So we'll start with you, Mike. What types of things are you looking for now in a leader to make sure you've got the right succession planning, that this person can be a resilient leader moving forward and rebound forward?
Yeah, great question. And it's, as you're mentioning, it's a lot more about the how and not the what, right? So historically, organizations, right, you find someone that can fill a box and who's the best person to fill that box with, and that box is very known today. And that role will stay that way for a long time. We're not in that world anymore, right? Your role might exist now for the next couple of years, and then it might completely different several years later, based on organizational needs. So the skills we're looking for, that we look for predominantly, and obviously it matters what levels you're looking for and everything else, right? So it's what you're saying before, and everything that you're bucketing in is really about influencing skills, right? So, someone gives me an example of what they did. What I want to know is how they do it. Who'd they bring on the journey? To use Jay's word, was there a detractor? How did you manage that detractor? How did you either onboard them or not, depending on what it is? What was your vision? Was it your vision, or was the vision given to you? And if it was given to you, did you shape it at all or not? And the last piece is really, you said it in the beginning about being matrix, right? So matrix organizations have existed. I think this is another evolution of matrix organizations where, even within the matrix, there's a matrix, right?
Right.
And it's really about, like, so for again, if I'm looking at new product development or even supply chain resiliency, those objectives are not owned by me, right? Either a business owns them or supply chain owns them. However, I'm confident to say those objectives are fully shaped by me, right? Meaning
Right.
that, and it's really that, like, if you don't own the metric, how do you shape it and develop it so it's a win-win for your organization and something else? So those are, kind of the skills we look for, that we press a lot more on. And that's why, quite honestly, a lot of the interviews are moving to more panel interviews, so you can get to see how the people interact with it as well. So.
Yeah, just an example, I was helping a nonwovens company recruit for a senior leader position, and there were two candidates that grew up in nonwovens their whole life, substrate development, heavy manufacturing, but then there was someone totally unrelated that grew up like in a food business, and they were really struggling to see how this food person in the food business could actually lead. But that was when I screened them, that was the resilient leader. That person knew how to get things done. That person knew how to collaborate, had the right mindset in terms of pivoting and being willing to change and all that. So we were able to convince the board and all that to buy into this person. And they've only been in the job 8 months now, but so far so good. But it's not the leaders we used to recruit yesterday based on what their resume said anymore. To me, it's much different. So Jay, maybe you can chime in and help us understand how you're looking at that too.
Sure, Cheryl. And I was just thinking while you guys were talking, I mean, I've been in industry for over 30 years now, and I can remember, we always used to interview on, does a person have strategic thinking ability? Is a person creative? Are they innovative? And I've noticed a shift, and I've replaced those sort of requirements with, is the person adaptable? Are they agile? Can they shift left or right as needed when the wind blows and the business changes? Are they humble? Can they admit that they're not always right and that others might have a better solution? And are they empathetic? So all of those soft skills today, I think, are much more important than the strategic thinking and the creativity and all of those buzzwords that we have used in the past. And I often look for leaders when especially senior leaders that I wanted to bring into the organization, for ones that have faced adversity or have faced major setbacks in their careers, and that have really demonstrated the ability to transform those setbacks into opportunities to grow and become better leaders for the company they've worked in or for other companies as they've changed roles. And I also look for leaders who are self-confident in themselves and that have values and beliefs that are consistent with those of the company, that want to find a solution and have a can-do attitude and just don't come to the meeting and give me 1,000 excuses of why things can't be done. I think they have to have a certain, I guess I would call it a virtue about themselves, Cheryl, that they in their past careers that they've taken a stand, and either they've been successful in defending and advocating for that stand and have stuck to their principles, or decided to move on and change companies because they couldn't get the company to adhere to the stand that they believed in. And lastly, it's a person who knows their limitations and seeks guidance and help from others, as we've all talked about today. Collaboration is so important, and having a pack of people around you that have a like mind and can achieve what we need to achieve. Collaboration is so important. We all work in heavily matrixed organizations. I think Mike said matrix within a matrix within a matrix. And it's so important to get people who understand how to navigate those matrices and be successful in that type of environment.
And I want to build off this navigate to be successful thought you have, Jay. And I didn't know that's where you were going to end, but it fits perfect with where I want to go, because I think part of it is, as you recognize someone with potential lower in the organization, how do you help them develop thick skin and be resilient, right? Because the organization is tough to navigate. The organization has things that end up going against where they're trying to pioneer or where they might want to take something. And we've been through it, again, not to say our ages, but we're all of like age here, and we've been through that and, have the bumps and scars at times to show that. But how do we help junior people get thicker skin so that they can become more resilient as a leader in the future? So either one of you, whoever, Mike, you want to start, and then Jay can chime in, or?
Yeah, I mean, everyone will say, well, it's all about development and development plans for individuals and everything else, right? That's the HR speak for it, which is, listen, it's a 100% what you should be, development for individuals is far outweighs their goals and objectives. However, a good development plan should give them experiences for resiliency. So, I think what I'm hearing from Jay, and I'll use my organization as well, a lot of roles are being created for agility, resiliency for the organization, and there's no rule book for it. It's a new role. Like I said, resilient supply chain is new for the organization. We started an entire organization based on that this year. We needed a leader for that. We looked at an individual that we said this would be a great development activity for them. And we're building the resiliency for that individual as well as their team based on that experience. So, I think as roles keep evolving and everything else, putting your right talent in those roles to help them drive that and build those skill sets.
That's good. Very good. Jay?
Yeah, and maybe I have a little different perspective than Mike. I think, I've witnessed young developing leaders experiencing criticism and difficulties and not having the thick skin, and time again. And sometimes they never develop that thick skin. They are always hurt by whatever is said to them. And so I think thick skin, or whatever you want to call it, Cheryl, really comes with confidence and a belief in yourself and your own personal capabilities and a purpose that you have as an individual and as a leader. And if you don't have that, all of the sort of experiences of being put into these types of situations sometimes never gets that person to turn the corner. So I think it's built. And I said this the other day in a discussion about inspiration, that if you don't believe in yourself and you don't believe that you are doing the right things, then it's really easy to get injured because your skin is not thick. I think you develop that thick skin by building your capabilities, building your own personal brand, making sure that everybody understands what you stand for in that company, and then I think you can survive. And we also, we do what Mike had suggested. We do a lot of mentoring. We put people into different types of situations so that they learn. But I think the strongest asset and the strongest indicator of someone who has thick skin is one who knows who they are and knows what they know and has a belief in the purpose that they are trying to drive forward.
Great. Now, for those of you sitting listening to all of this, and for Mike and Jay, the last thing I wanted to talk about is we have these resilient leaders emerging in our organizations, few of them, but emerging. They, again, are willing to change. They're good storytellers. They're there to embrace the risk and pivot when needed. How do you reward those behaviors versus the typical behaviors that the organization rewards by getting things out the door, right? So how do you reward behaviors versus results, or some combination of behaviors and results? But we have to really nurture these individuals as resilient leaders. So what are your thoughts on rewards and recognition for them? Mike?
Yep. So, this is always a challenge, right? Because you typically reward on the what and not the how. But as leaders of an organization, the way you pivot it is you've got to start rewarding for the how. And, it's a journey. It's always difficult, especially when you're dealing and calibrating with people outside your organization, whether in my world within R&D or even outside of R&D when you're calibrating. With different leaders, but as a leader, you have to push for it and ensure for your organization that you can deliver all your goals. But if you're not driving this and building these skill sets, you're not going to be rewarded as such, right? And it's all about how you determine potential, how you rotate those people into choice roles so they get visibility for it and everything else. but it's not just that you're going to build a simple CSD or a goal and say now you're going to be resilient, right? That doesn't count. It's got to be built into the goals and objectives where the behavior is what success is, not so much the result. The result will happen because of the behavior. I guarantee that.
Right.
But it's really ensuring that the success is the how. It's not necessarily the what.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. Jay?
Yeah, maybe I continue on that theme of the what's versus the hows. We expect our leaders to deliver the what in the organization, and we use the how to differentiate between those that meet expectations and those that exceed expectations. So the how is really the differentiator, and that's how we reward our people. I mean, both two leaders can accomplish the same thing, one in a manner that's probably not the right way to accomplish that, and another one that has been resilient, has faced adversity and really overcome that in the right way. And we really reward them by giving them higher ratings at the end of the year, a faster career path to senior leadership positions within the organization, and then giving them opportunities that really motivate them to continue to improve their capabilities in the organization. So moving them around to different roles, letting them go on assignments outside their current role, working outside the company, working with universities, doing all those types of things that might motivate them to get to the next level. So we use the how as the differentiator. The what is what we expect everybody to deliver in the end.
Yeah, that's great. So just some top level thoughts to take away. Again, resiliency is all about that rebounding forward, trying to look forward, not back. Yes, have to understand what's been there, but move forward. Try to focus on the storytelling, look for leaders that are willing to change, embrace the change, embrace the sneezers, right, Jay? Embrace them and figure out how to move them forward. And we all need to schedule more time to think. We kind of lose sight of that. But I really want to thank Jay and Mike for being part of this panel. I've enjoyed working with you and, of course, working with you to set up for this panel. So thank you very much.